Reason has a lot of sampling capability and a lot of samplers. Little ID8 is actually a very simple, very basic rompler with incredibly usable sounds. I've used some of these sounds quite a lot. But that's not what we're really going to be looking at. The main central sampler for Reason is NNXT. NNXT is very, very powerful, but surprisingly easy to use so long as you understand the nature of sampling. What Reason offers in terms of sampling is an absolute dreamscape for what everyone wanted in sampling back in the 90s. But it wasn't technically doable, either on a computer or in hardware. People were super excited when the Ensoniq EPS16 Plus came out, and you could actually sample back inside itself. It might even have been a software revision. It was like you could make a sound and use the onboard effects and then say sample back into your own memory. And it was like, because previously to do that you had to bounce it out somewhere, tape or whatever, and then record it back in every time, AD conversions, all kinds of stuff. And especially if it was tape or cassette, you lost so much in the generation. Now, there were some cool things that happened. You think Bomb Squad behind Public Enemy, several generations of vinyl tape, compression, all kinds of stuff like that. It was a boom, splat, boom, splat. And it was a really cool kind of narrow, chunky sound. You can achieve that with Reason, but Reason allows you to do all those things that we wanted to do back then, now, but with the full power and ease of digital. Now, I'm not a sampling beatmaster or anything like that, but I lived through those times, and I know that Reason now is so incredibly capable and has been for a long time. People often pass it over because it doesn't have a right click to do all the work for you. But the great thing about sample lists back then was that because everything was so incredibly hard to use, expletive deleted, that everybody came up with a slightly different way of getting to the result. And some of the corners that had to be cut meant that you got those really characterful, interesting results. So many of those early sample-based songs are really, really interesting and really broken if you sit down and listen to them by the modern, perfection-oriented mindset. But it's in that brokenness. Pump up the volume. Boom, 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 ba-doom, boom, ba-doom, ba-doom. It's full of timing errors and all kinds of stuff. But a lot of that is what gives it its tremendous charm. Whether the guys were fully aware of the timing errors or not doesn't matter. They were instinctively, and they'd somehow used that stuff. So many times where you'd be watching TV and on would come I don't want to say who, Cookie Crew or whoever, and it'd be like you could actually hear the sample leaping because the times are not perfect. Now everything's perfect, but this allows you to work in that old school way, allowing for a bit more of the perfectness if that's, your obsession, but you can work old school and do stuff. So NNXT, an immensely powerful sample/synthesizer. My most loved synthesizer of all of them was actually my EMU Emax. I had two of them. I had a 1 turbo and then a 2. I think that might have been called officially a turbo as well. And they were beautiful, beautiful instruments. Not highly featured, but just lovely to use, lovely to sound. So we open NNXT, nothing happens. Great, because this is a sampler, nothing should happen. It's not like we should load this with a piano. You've got access to all of that, and remember I said you've got access to all of the orchestra samples as well. So it's an orchestra in a box within NNXT. The obvious thing that you'd think is, oh, okay, I'll go somewhere and I'll get me some samples and I will make some sounds. Here is one I prepared earlier. Yeah, but any idiot can do that. What we're going to show you is Reason's got an architecture designed for sampling and resampling. If we go over to the masters, we find, and I can't remember exactly what version this came in on, in here in the audio ins and outs, there is a sampling input. So seeing I use Control-Alt for my masters, which I explained early on, then we've got a spare one of these. Might as well use the boring old master arts to sampling input. So that means that we can now take whatever we're hearing and sample it. And you really got to stop and think on that, because remember back in the old days, that was hard. I mean, yes, we always sampled what we heard, but it wasn't always easy. So now we've got the ability to actually have, oh, there's nothing in that. So let's go over here. See, we've got a sample level input. We can monitor it and what have you. Read the manual on that. You know, it's really important to always RTFM. Don't say something can't do my thing if you haven't bothered to RTFM. And you can set your sample input level and what have you as well. I never move it because it's all fine. The sample is hearing whatever you're doing on your masters. And of course, this means that we can do generation after generation of basically digital bounce through a sampler, and it will hear whatever is there. Now, I hear some echo on that, so we might actually go over to the mixer, F5, and go, Thor has an echo on it, so we'll turn that off. Otherwise, we're going to sample that echo, which could be great, but is probably going to be a bad plan because it's going to end up in our sample. And so for the first round of sampling, we're going to look at just basic sampling of an oscillator wave, and then using that to be the springboard for almost an infinite number of types of sounds. So we have a sound here, and people will tell you that when you sample, you must sample, you know, at least once per octave or once per every note or what have you. Go for it. But like I said, I came up in the era of real hardware samplers where everything was expensive and limited. 1 meg or 2, and then 2 meg of sample memory in my Emaxes, so you couldn't put a lot in there. And if you lowered the sample rate, then it started to sound, well, less than charming. And while people go on about bit reduction and how amazeballs it is, it sounded less than charming. So what we've got is every instrument within reason that has the ability to use samples in whatever way. And remember, last time we showed you Europa, a synth, actually being able to load and play back samples and use those samples as filter curves. So there's lots of uses of things. And of course, we showed you Kong having sample players as well. We're not going to get into them because they're little self-evident. But every instrument and a couple of effects units have the ability to sample. And I'm pointing this out because it's very rare that VST instruments or what have you actually have the ability to be samplers. We've accepted the word sampler now meaning playback device, as opposed to you can record shit on this. You can record stuff on this. So we set it into record, play our key for a bit, move into the editor. There's a nice little editor with some basic things, so we can crop it, we can normalize it. There we go, that gets rid of the basics out of the way straight up. We might as well chop that bit off the end as well. We will turn this level down quite a bit because it can play back really super loud. There we go. Now I'm going to want to loop this, and we can loop it in here, which is way easier than what I used to have to do, which was everything by ear. It was all sample numbers, it was frame numbers. So I'm going to pick a point where, okay, it's going to be sensible to do. Now all this sort of stuff, we're probably going to want to miss the beginning of the sample. So I'm going to hit Control with my pinky and put that there. We can see this repeats a few times, and then I'm going to press Alt with my thumb and put this here. We can set my start point in further a bit, and then we can set the start to be inside here. If we hit play here now, okay, we can hear it clicking. That's fine. But we've got a basically functional loop. We will zoom in a little bit more. Sorry, this is always, I never do this with an audience. Now I'm going to look for a zero crossing. I want to get in as close as I can, and to find zero crossing. As you see, this editor will go in really, really close. And then we want to pull back at and focus on this guy here. By putting your play point, your cursor head, it will largely arrange things for you. So there we've got our zero crossing play. Sounds pretty good. I think we're going to end up with some little glitches and pops at a once we stretch that back out a little bit. So let's just give it a little bit more time. This is one of those things you just get used to. The fact that you probably will end up with, you can hear these tiny, tiny pops, which will become a problem later, particularly as you pitch down. So let's have a listen to this. Yeah, see, that's worse. Okay. That's gone. You have to do the hard work. If you're not willing to do the hard work, you just won't get the results. Now, I'm going to drag this end and just hack that off. We can drag this a lot closer in. Hack this off. I don't love hacking off at exactly the sample. In theory, it's fine, but sometimes it feels to me like you can end up with clicks and pops and stuff. And nowadays, with sample memory being pretty free and cheap, now we can set our start to anywhere we want. We can be safe and put it at zero crossing, or we can be obtuse and look for a nice DC pop and crop there. Now we're going to have a DC pop when this starts playing. And you might go, well, why would you want to do that? And it's like, well, some sounds are great with the DC pop, some are not. We can use the envelopes to deal with that. But if we don't have it, we don't have it. We'd have to load another sample to add a DC pop. Now it's normalized and everything. We can do it again, but we're not going to get any changes here. And we can call this short wave because it's a short wave. It's not a single cycle. We could go even tighter. And in the old days, I used to get us close. Ooh, that's supposed to be shortwave. Oops. Now it's not vaguely pornographic. There we go. And we can get into crossfadings. If it was never possible to loop this, it'll crossfade, blah, blah, blah. RTFM, learn about sample looping. Crossfaded loops are never as good as a perfect loop like this. So take the time, use your ears. And this is the one good point where headphones are great, a good clear set, not Beats or anything ghastly that's bassy, like a child's headphone. Find something that's super, super clear. These are AKG K52s. They're dirt cheap, but they're like NS10s of headphones. They are like, but they're great. So we save off our sample. That's now there. And if I go here, now this is transposed across the whole key range. Brilliant. Now this can be used to make a synth sound. We could drag our range out a little bit further if we want. There's only so many octaves that a sample can be transposed before you get problems. And this, I think, goes up by 4 or 5 octaves before it suddenly goes, no, I'm not going to go any further. And that's fair enough. It's appropriate that it does that. So we can start doing synthesizer stuff to this. This is now, hear that nice little DC pop. These are very fast. Pop disappears. So I'm pleased there's a little pop there because I can use that. If I'm going to make a bass sound, add you've got various things here, all the usual stuff, wherever your root note is. You see I moved that an octave there. We could change our root note here, same result. We can change fine tuning. We can change our start point. We can change our end point, and then our loop points can be changed here as well. It automatically will tend to default to whatever loop is already built in, but you can have it without a loop, a normal loop, a forwards-backwards loop, which often will not be so cool. And then, I can't remember what that is. You'd have to RTFM on that because I never use them. Key range, we've got velocity ranges. So this is a really pretty powerful system for laying out key things. I'm not getting too heavily into that because, again, there are other places that have more time, and there's quite a lot that can get involved with that. But we can set any of these samples, a zone, to respond to only a certain velocity range. So if you're doing drums, say, you could say, okay, well, I want the first part of the velocity range to be this quiet hit, the middle of the range to be this semi-loud hit, and then the top little bit, the bit where they truly smacked it. You can do that up to 128 times, depending on how fastidious you want to be. You can also, with that little DC, we can provide little bits of fades and what have you. One thing that is very cool, now let's go grab ourselves a couple of other samples. So we'll just go here and we'll grab some things that are going to be different. So now we've got all these zones. They all play at once. Or you can go alternate. And the more astute of you will realise, hang on, these sort of playing round robin, but they're playing random robin. So it will play only one of these samples in this group at any given point in time. So if we set them all to have the same filtery what have you going on, I think it's this one. So you can do some pretty cool stuff in that respect as well. We'll get rid of these guys, delete zones, and we'll put that back to off. And then you've got multiple outputs. So you can send different samples to different outputs. That means you can do very cool drum stuff inside here. Bear in mind you've got Kong, which is designed for that, but sometimes drums inside here are a really nice way of doing things. And it gives you more power. So never forget that an NXT can be a absolutely tremendous drum module. I used to make all my drums in the Emacs using just the envelopes. So I'd use things like this for making my drum sounds. This is when synthesis becomes truly interesting rather than just doing the same boring thing, because none of my drum sounds sounded like anybody else's drum sounds. So we can make a variety of different types of sounds. And then, of course, you can make all the usual paddy sounds as well. We can take something and then we can duplicate my zones. I can either fine-tune it in there or fine-tune it here. And then I can do stuff like panning it out left and right for a big silly wide sound. I want to pull that level back. One thing about NNXT, it is possible to overdrive this unit. Most VST software instruments, you can't really overdrive them. This you can overdrive. It's probably not a good thing because it just goes splat. But if this level is too high, it will overdrive. I don't know what it overdrives, but if you're hearing distortion and you've got some of these in your mix, could well be one of these. It's running just too hot. And then, just again to show you, you can grab another thing. I think that one was interesting. So we'll give this guy some. Now, if we've got several layers and they have mismatching, you'll see that I've got these little M. That lets us know something's not all in the same octaves as each other. So we can move a few effects. We end up with some really lovely sounds. These two sounds, because they're starting in exactly the same spot, then they get a little bit flangy. So what we can do is we can take this sample start point and drag it out a bit. If we pull Mr. Doom out. Or we can pull it out quite a bit. Or we can take this, meaning that different velocities, you can hear there it changes its phase relationship with each other. And so you don't get that flangy sound. NNXT very much has a sound of its own, and it sounds like 90s sampler. And you might think that's a terrible thing. I think that's a pretty cool thing. And it's always going to depend what you feed it. If you feed it nice, perfect sawtooths and what have you, it'll be very nicely behaved 90s sampler. If you feed it strange, noisy sounds, it's going to be very nicely behaved 90s sampler. It's not a thing that you can change a lot, but you should never forget that it's there, because it's a very inexpensive, in terms of CPU, way to build very, very complex sounds with layers of interesting, bizarre samples. Put them together, just using the inbuilt filters, which you can offset here. And you get really, really nice sounds. So it's not one that should be underestimated, because this is the heart of sampling. I think you can have up to 99 layers. The only limit really with this, which is a practical laws of physics kind of limit, is that you can't automate anything inside the guts of here. Reason stuff tends to be incredibly automatable, but when there's too much stuff, you actually run out of ability to do them. So you can automate these, but not this, and nor do you have much in the way of CV control. You've got CV control for stuff on the outside, but not on the inside, because bearing in mind also when this was made, that was just not a doable thing. There are only so many parameters that a device can expose to the outside world. People have talked about doing something else, but you know what? I just don't think it's necessary, maybe in time. But the reality is that there are so many options and so many ways of skinning the cat that it's really very charming that this does not change. Plus, one of the big advantages and one of the big things is that if you started a song in Reason 1, not this was there was a different sampler, the NN19, that you can open it in Reason 13 and it will be exactly the same. You're not going to run into a situation where, like, we revised this instrument 17 times and changed it 14 times for fashion, and it no longer represents your song as you made it. It's going to open and it's going to be exactly the same, and it's going to sound 99.99% exactly the same. So that's actually a tremendous strength, because it is software. It's meant to work that way. Maybe in time there'll be another sampler that does things differently, but until then, this is awesome, especially if you lived through the era of true sampling. Alrighty, so that's NNXT done. The next one, which is kind of similar, is grain. Grain is a funny thing, and I haven't necessarily ever made my piece, but that said, I have used this several times on records. So you can find a sample. Here's one I found earlier. And you can play it back in various ways. Here is said sound. Said sound actually comes, and I think it's only very fair to name them if we go up. The Osa is a 100-year-old piano, which I was asked to review elsewhere, and with that came a whole lot of random sample stuff, as well as the beautiful sound of this unique instrument. So I just grabbed one of those at random, and we can transform this into various things. So granular, quite simply, is in an XT you saw you had one playhead. It's just like tape. It just plays, starts at the beginning, keeps going till it loops and comes back around. This has the option for that. I always grab the wrong one, which is called tape. Now this has got some settings to it, so that's not quite going to behave as the way you expect. And then various different ways of handling these grains, which means that rather than you just playing it like normal, like this tape head passing over the sample, you're actually playing very, very tiny slices of the thing and then doing mathematical stuff to it. The easiest ones to start to understand are the long grains. You can see each one of these is a grain. The grain can be so long, the grains can be fired off at such and such a rate. And crossfaded or not crossfaded. And you get a fairly distinctive sort of a sound. And where you've got the grains overlapping each other, you get this really rich, well, digitally sound, especially if you jitter, as in slightly randomize panning and pitch and what have you. So we've got the sense of a string here. We've got some of the timbre of that piano. That's its sort of original tuning area, but it's different. To be fair, there is an oscillator in here. It often helps to have an oscillator in with these sorts of sounds, because they can start to feel a little unconnected, and you can feel like you have tuning issues with them in a piece. Put it in an oscillator, whether it's a sine wave or whatever, and it'll solidify around that thing. It'll normalize to it. Well, it doesn't. Our brain simply goes, oh, okay, you're part of that sound, you belong there, and it clumps it together, rather than going, I don't know what you're relevant to, and getting confused. So grain is one of those ones you're going to get it, and you're going to get something out of it, or you're going to open it, you're going to put stuff in it, and you go, this blows. Grain, I'm like that with everybody's grain player. Grain here has a slightly more specific approach to how it's handled grain, which sometimes I wonder might limit it compared to some other grain devices. Doesn't have the little displays where you see all the grain things, but honestly, that's just, it's a little hands down pants. While they're cool, reason's always been about being very efficient and very streamlined. So this is very efficient and very streamlined. It's possible that there are some slight losses because of it, but it is a unique instrument. And if you take your time and you find the beauty in the material, especially if we go, look, this is part of the sound, and now I'm going to add another part to the sound. So we put this in a combinator with another instrument, and this becomes part of the body around it. So we might get rid of that oscillator and say, well, the other instrument, the Thor or the Europa, is going to provide the body of this instrument. This is going to add the something around it. Then Grain's wonderful for that. They even made their own device, which is like that scenic. It's actually a pair of these or 4 of these or something or other. I can't remember. Basically in a box with a compiler controller thing on the outside. That's really what Grain's designed to do. So much of Reason's stuff, it looks like it's high level, but it's also designed to run as low level as well. So that you say, well, okay, this is kind of like a layer. And then we grab another instrument, we put that in, that's a layer as well. I was thinking of sort of D50s, where they call it a partial. Well, here's a partial. Here's a quarter of our patch. Then you get 3 other creative sources, synthesizers, and we put the 4 of them together and we pile up a sound. So Grain is wonderful for that. The other thing that Reason is renowned for, and where they actually started to get known, was Rex. Rex is a format that lots of synths and DAWs actually subscribe to and use. Rex is a way of taking a file and choppertying it based upon the transients. So it actually goes in, and you can either just set it to chop it every quarter or note or every 16th or whatever, but it's actually designed to hear your transients and go, I'll chop there, and you suddenly get something that's like usable multi-samples out of a loop. Let me show you how that works. Here's one I prepared earlier. I have a set of sounds, and as you see, these were all made just as I showed you last time. No samples here, kiddies. And a clipper just across the top so that we get decent levels here. So we've got that. Now, if I take that and I go into my sequencer, see I've got my loop here. If I right-click on that, beep, 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 and go to bounce in place, wait a second or two, bing! It mutes this because it goes, well, you've now got it in audio. What do you want that for again? I've now got this as audio. If I right-click, I can normalize it nice and fast. If I open this up, so it's now in the editor, then I can see the whole thing. And I can view it in a couple of ways. And we can view it as slices. Look at this. Bing! It's automatically sliced it. People used to pay good money for the Rex application. You see that it's picked up really every transient here. Every single transient. Now, there are various things we can do with that. We can grab this and go, no, I want to move it around and what have you. I really don't want to do that. So I'm going to undo any of these changes that I make here. Slice edit. But if I really don't want where something's been put, I can actually split all my slices out, I can revert them to what they were, and I can move the positions of all of these slices. So I can put them in set slices exactly how I want. I'm not going to go and show you because, again, that's an RTFM thing. You need to really understand that. And me giving you too quick an overview, you'll go, that's everything I need to know. No, boys and girls, everything you need to know is in the RTFM. And it's Reason stuff is generally really well written. If for some reason you're too cool to RTFM, then go out and James Bernard was an earlier version of Ryan, has done a lot of how-tos and all this kind of stuff. I'm pretty sure that was available in his time. If not, Ryan will have done one, but look particularly at the Propeller Heads ones on the Reason Studio, same, because they will be correct. I have seen some videos where other third parties are showing them and sort of go, dude, you missed something. And that's okay. But if you're wanting to know what your real options are, start by RTFM. So you can set all of your points at which it's cutting out each instrument. Like here it says, oh, I've got a little transient. We'll cut that one out as well. And then we can get this, right-click on it, bounce. Bounce in place is a bit pointless. Clips to new samples, a little pointless in this situation, although we could take that as a loop and put it into NNXT. But what we're going to do here is we're going to bounce this to a Rex loop. There's Rex done already. So Kong 1 bounced, 2, create. Brilliant. And look, it's now given me a Rex player. And if I press run on this, close that down. Oops, it's muting here. That's what I was. Yeah, they're the same. Little bit of very tight flanging, which is to be expected in the situation, but they are the same. All three are exactly the same as each other. So we can then take this, which is a Rex loop, into Dr. OctoRex. There is a simpler, smaller version of the Rex player, and then there's Nurse Rex, which will go inside Kong, but I'm not going to go through them because Rex is Rex is Rex. Dr. OctoRex allows you up to 8 of these loops, and you can bounce around, you can move from them. So within the sequencer, you can actually say, I want to have pattern 1, then I want to have pattern 7, then I want to have pattern 2. And it's just the coolest sample looping system ever. And as I said, so cool that everyone uses it. It's become an industry standard. Overview. So if we set this guy to run, we can apply filters and stuff. So immediately we're a little bit more bomb squad. Cool. You can apply. Someone's been drinking. So that kind of stuff. Apply pitch to things, all the basic synthesizer-y stuff that we want to do. We can then come to each one of these slices individually. So get a bit small, and we can say, oh, okay, that one there. So we go copy loop to track. So it's right-click, copy loop to track. Now, if we look at this MIDI is a bit mental. It's quite literally just going key 1, key 2, key 3, and they are the length of the Rex slices. So if we play this now, I just turned this off because otherwise it will flange again. This is playing purely from here. See, notes to slot. Cool. Meaning that we can take this and shuffle it around, which I'll endeavor to come back and show you later. But we can pick one of these and we can say, oh, well, let's just transpose this guy a little bit. This guy, yeah, I don't think I like him like that. Let's just change him a little bit. That one there, he really needs to be backwards. That seems like it's going to be just too bright to be cool, so we'll lower it. We can pick slices and say, no, I want that slice to go to a sub-output where it can have different processing, different sound effects, what have you. So now let's listen to what we've got. a little bit of panning. Let's say I want that one to be a lot shorter. So I can do various things to each one of these individual slices to give us a slightly different feel. Now going in here, we can actually highlight all of our notes, and then we can start to do stuff to them. Control A, position, we can move them around, we don't want to do that. Note, we can open up our note panel here and say we can look to randomize note pitches. So now we have a new drum performance. Is it realistic? No. Is it interesting? It's a bit lazy. At least that one doesn't come out super cool. But it's also kind of cool at the same time. So if we took this one, put the two together, or even better, had a completely different drum performance. Let's say we thought of this a little like Visage's Fade to Grey, or Lucky Phil's In the Air Tonight. We could have a little drum machine sound that's got a kooky pattern, and then have our main drums, and the two work together. And so you end up with a really cool thing. I mean, there are more modern versions of that, but I don't know the names of any of the tracks. But if you don't know Visage's Fade to Grey, stop pretending to be a musician. You need to know this stuff. It's super important. It's one of the first times that people heard this drum machine and drums playing together in that way. So there's a lot that you can do with Rex. There's a lot more you can do with Rex that I'm showing you, but that's the power of Rex. Plus, if you've got other things that accept Rex format, once you've got your Rex file, which was here, then obviously we can export it. Export it as a Rex file to wherever we want to send that to. Yay. That will go in anywhere, including other Reason devices that will recognize the Rex format. So it's really very, very powerful. I've heard people whine, it's like, oh, you have to buy Rex and blah, blah, blah. And it's just like, dude, the thing's built into Reason. There may be slightly different things that you can do, but if you can't do what you want to do here, either your idea is rather silly or you just haven't stopped to think it through. Stop, think it through. Because this is what, as I keep saying, made the difference with the samplists in the early days. Things that came out and you were just like, Fatboy Slim, check it out now, Punk Soul Brother. That was different. Even the later, and when a lot of this stuff was established, Buckethead's Da Bomb, which was a whole lot of mostly Chicago samples. The band Chicago, Street Player. But it was really nicely done. And a lot of that was in how they had done that made that really cool. Yes, not as wild as Pump Up the Volume in terms of like, oh, geez, that was a couple of bits of string and some sticky tape. But it was nicely done because it was uniquely done. So if you're going, how can I do a thing, then think your way through it. Because the solution that you come up with may not be exactly what you were expecting, but it's going to be unique. And the last thing the world needs, especially from indie acts who are trying to get noticed, up against everybody doing exactly the same boring formula stuff, again, expletive deleted, is do wild things. And Reason makes it so easy to do wild things because we can do this, we can sample it off, we can Rex it off, we can do all kinds of stuff with it, which is super cool. The next thing that we will look at is Mimic. Mimic is a pretty recent fella and an odd one. It really is an odd one. But it is designed very much in the mindset, in keeping with what I said, of Reason being somewhat like the playground that every samplist would have just taken their pants off and run around with them on their head in the mid-90s. So Mimic is a kooky sample playing thing. You can have it do rompler-ish things. Here we've got 2 single patches. So that's a sample, and then that's a sample. The first one is playing back with a sort of tape loop kind of scenario. The second one is playing back using stretching. And we've got some truly fabulous aliasing, because anyone who says that things shouldn't alias has just never lived. Go listen to a virus. The early-ish, it may have been there all the way through. It was a later virus that I played, and it was like, oh my god, this thing's just full of aliasing. Aliasing's good. It's character. So this allows for all of those usual imperfections. So there are various modes for handling transposition. I was going to say stretching, and yes, they are stretching, but they're really for transposition. So tape means, and that becomes pretty dead up top, and that's infinitely more usable. Okay, maybe you don't want to put that straight to record, but within the context of a multi-page, and this feels so old school sampler that it's either not funny or truly hilarious. And I don't use it a lot, in part because it's a little bit of a mystery ride. But when I do, like this sound, I just made this up yesterday. And straight away I'm thinking, oh, that would be fabulous in a piece. We've got this nice sort of Asian-y kind of thing, and the bell and the contrast of it, and it's like, this is cool. It's not its major use to work as a competitor for NNXT or a Rompler. Its primary purpose really is in slicing. So it's another version of how to make Recs, but to make them on the fly. So if we were to get rid of our sample here, where's my reset device? There it is. All right, now we've got a fully reset device. It doesn't do anything. I'll turn this off. Now we've got our sound in here. And we can use the normal tape. We can use the advanced. And it's keeping our tempo reasonably accurate. Granular. So this is a little like grain. This is usable. Silly, but usable. So it gives us lots of ways to play around with. That's most interesting. The huff sound that comes in there. So there are quite a few different ways of changing the way that things play back, just on the playback side. We can, of course, loop, and we can set where our loop works from, and it's kind of backwards, but once you make sense of it, it works, and it's just fine. There is then the ability to slice. So see how we can just choose which way we're working around. So if we go into slice mode, this is just going to play the slice. And we can see where it goes to on the keyboard, just shy of C4, there, because they read out here. So it's like a more visual form of Recs. This has become a chopped up Recs loop, and see how it did it for you easily. Now we can change the sensitivity with which this goes. I could say I only want a few sounds here. We can set it to play through. So at the moment, it only plays that loop and stop, or that slice and stop. So we can set it to play through. And it picks up and it just keeps going from wherever. Little things that make a real difference there. We'll give ourselves a few more slices. You can also take these slices and replace them. Again, RTFM on that, please, because you're going to need to be sure that you've got things working right before you get sort of too much into that. So you can control a lot about how this works. You can set your start and end points. And now if I'm correct, yes, you can zoom right in. Like really, really zoom in and out. So if I wanted to, I could say, okay, well, I just want to turn this into 4 slices. So I could go, okay, we've got 2 slices, 3, 4, or whatever. I know it was Ryan who did all of the videos on these, but 1, 2, 3, it kind of looks like it might be quarters. But whatever, we can make our own set of slices here, and we can zoom in and make sure that they are suiting what we want and need. It's just showing us our slice here. So if that's what we want as our slice, that's what we get. And again, we can just play them back however we want, as I showed you with Rex. As a synth, this one is a little kookier. We can change the speed, but remember the speed can be it's up our sensitivity, so it's a little bit more what we expect. Getting into kind of pull stretch territory. So if we sort of say, look, some of that's just not the way we want it to be, then we can change that. Each of these can be changed with various criteria. So we could say, okay, I want this to change randomly. So within a drum loop, that's obviously going to sound somewhat interesting. If we were to set up a loop, I think these are all roughly 16ths. Can be a bit random now. So we end up with a seems a little fast. Let's kill this guy. So setting random speed means we just get different results. If we set our loops, as you see, you're very quickly getting intriguing results. So you can control that using very well all the usual suspects, including CVs. So remember, we can bring in CVs that are doing any kind of shape. And so long as it serves our purposes, that is really very, very good. We've got access to a fairly usual filter set. We'll loop off for now. Let's apply the random again because it's just super easy. This makes it a bit more fun to listen to. All the usual envelope stuff, velocity, not that we've got any velocity stuff happening here, comb filters, a drive which can be pretty fiery. Repitching for the whole thing. Key follow, not key follow. Tuning, so of course we can set our for a bit of fun. LFOs, that sort of stuff. All the usual suspects. Amp modifications, so we can do things like setting our LFO, actually it's our LFO here. And this is per loop, it's not quite as granular as OctoRex itself, but it is just intriguing. There's in this compressor squeezy thing. Pull this out for the moment. So it can be very, very brutal. An effect where you can add in various little bits of effects. A little bit of ring modulation for a nice early 80s feel. Oh yes, all the usual bit crushy kind of stuff. So we're getting into skinny puppy territory here. Or Scream, which is pretty heavy-handed. Probably not fuzz, but it's pretty heavy-handed. There is an EQ, just low, high, which actually works really nicely. So that's immediately, especially if we did a couple of generations of this, that is immediately putting us into that sort of Bomb Squad Public Enemy kind of territory. It is also possible to send and return. You've got individual slot outs, but you can also send and return to various other effects. I can't remember whether I ever used that or not, but it's just interesting. So Mimic is an incredibly kooky instrument that's easy to overlook, and it's a mistake to overlook it because while it has a certain sense of infuriation, you can get things out of it you're just not going to get any other way, even if only by the fact that you stumbled and fell over your own shoelaces whilst being really, really confused where the door was in some sort of Escher painting. You're likely to get strange and interesting results out of it. The more you learn it, obviously, the less strange those results will be, but it's really fascinating. So you've got basically two modes, which is pitch mode, which is just a pretty standard sampler playback. Slice mode, which becomes a rexifying, chop up your thing, and it auto chops it for you and does a very accurate job. You've then got multi-pitch, which, as I showed you at the beginning, allows you to set several samples on top of each other. So in theory, you could put drum loops or whatever floats your boat. You've got to get creative with this kind of stuff. Or multi-slot, which is... Oh, this was clever. I can't remember how this one works. Isn't that silly? But it's clever. You've got these different playback modes, and they allow you to do different things in very much in keeping with early 90s sampling, but at the same time done in ways that draw in modern desires, modern methods, while still kind of handballing you right back to that early 90s feel. So I think that it's an instrument, if you're interested in the sampleism thing, that absolutely should be used, because once you bring in effects and what have you, you're just going to get quite fascinating results. I'm going to say you sample this back off and do something else in a couple of rounds, and you're going to end up with truly bizarre things. And that is a wonderful, wonderful thing.